Well, hello, creatives, community, and kind folks. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. Sorry about the terrible lighting. I'm still trying to get my lighting situation to its proper level. Although I will admit, the better the lighting, the more graybeard this graybeard grognard tends to look. So thank you very much, here, creatives, community, and kind folks. Today we are going to talk about uh, allow me to give you an opportunity to think about three elements of game design as I publicly talk about designing a game, creating my own system using open gaming licenses and system reference documents, better known as OGLs and SRDs, and those kind of things. And I thought we would bring up, uh, I'm going to call them up down semantics and rewards. And just this is just basically food for thought for those out there that are consummate world builders and game designers in the tabletop role playing space, and to offer something to think about, which might seem a bit minor in our game design. So this is going to be a bit high minded. So what do I mean by up down? Um, Thinking about up down is the idea of things going up in numbers, usually mechanically in numbers, or lowering in numbers. And while this isn't as much of an issue in terms of uh, natural language features, it can present itself a problem, especially if it is counter to the feeling you want to have in your tabletop role playing game. So, what I mean by hey Vince, currently writing, yes, and I hope some others will tune into this kind of series because I'm risking a little bit of not coming across as helpful as I would like to. So up down, if you follow me on this, hey, good morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening, depending on what side of the pond you're on. The idea of up down is you have a trait, and you could name that trait anything, and we're going to hey, good morning. Uh, hey, thank you very much. Yeah, Vince is like, I like game design stuff. So up down is you have a trait. You can name that trait anything. Let's call that trait, let's steal from Call of Cthulhu. Let's call that trait sanity. Would you prefer in your game, and would your players prefer in the game, to have a trait of, say, sanity of 0, and that number go up so that you reach a terminal limit of your up, meaning like your character goes completely insane when you reach a 20 or an 8 or 687? Or is it number go down? Hey, my sanity trait is 20, but I've been seeing horrific things. Now my sanity trait is 3. So the reason why I bring up down is because subconsciously, and there is a an art to the art and science of game design, and sometimes in, let's say, a horror, horrific type of setting, you want your players to feel that they're losing something. So maybe it is better for them to have a high trait that slowly starts to come down, um, because it's the feeling of I'm losing something that it's difficult for me to gain back. Whereas in more of a heroic, maybe more cinematic type of game setting, you want players to feel that they are gaining in power. They're doing a Dragon Ball, powering up power, power up 9,000 kind of effect. Now, I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I'm just saying to consider those numbers. There are, for example, in Fantasy D20, there are a number of indie OSR type of games where it's D20 roll under rather than roll over. And I've heard people say that, well, the game design isn't bad, but it bothers them that they have to roll under a number rather than rolling high, rolling over a number. And taking into a fact into into facts, of course, based on your gaming system. Rolling under systems tend to be very number bounded, so you don't have exponentially increasing numbers going higher. Some people fear the balance getting out of control if you just have exponential numbers. Or players may start digging for bonuses in number high situations. So they're constantly looking for modifiers and circumstance bonuses and things like that that may detract from the hurry up, grab the dice and roll type of fast paced setting. You may just want a roll under system. And mind you, I'm not referring to any particular type of gaming system. I'm saying if you want to use an OGL and an SRD from a system, you may say, you know what, my game is supposed to be more superheroic, and this game really starts to detract from that because it's very much a lose number kind of effect, and you may not want to have that. You guys are saying, uh, Vince says, I think when it goes up, I would call it insanity, and when it goes down, I would call it sanity. Don't get ahead of me because we're going to talk about semantics as well. Yeah, Vincent also says, generally, I like gaining stuff I would like to have and losing stuff I would not like to have, or I don't want to lose in case of like horror damage. And it could be something like equipment or access to magic or special abilities or features in the game. Um, for example, you may have a game where you gain negative conditions. They attach to your character. That may be a level a an upward momentum game that you start gaining things, but they're negative on your character. And you may have features in your game. I'm just making an example. Maybe there are tokens or cards, or if there's a digital effect that starts to uh, cover your character sheet or something in these like red tokens that are supposed to represent like blood splotches or something, and you're like, oh no, I've got another blood splotch, just like six on my character sheet, I hate it. And that may be the feeling you want. This concept made me think about the terrible RPG. It was a winner of a 200 word one page role playing game contest. And I believe that contest still goes on. 200 words or less, one page, design a role playing game. And the terrible RPG is you write down skills and abilities on a single sheet of paper. And whenever you want to perform something, you tear your sheet of paper, removing at least a small portion of the skill that you wrote down. And it makes you there is a thought process and creative process. Do I write the words very big or small? How much of the piece of paper do I write it on? And of course, you are tearing apart the piece of paper. At a certain point, you're going to get down to such small pieces of paper that it will become the downfall of your character. 10 Candles and Dread are other examples of using something that is not within the game but has a representative feature that makes you feel what the game feels. Those are extreme. Using the stacking Jenga tower, falling tower concept, and if you pull the wrong brick, your character, there's a downfall of your character. In 10 Candles, you keep blowing out a candle until the gaming table is so dark with only like 3 candles lit and things of that nature. Yeah, it's very much like that. Vince's Dark Eye has roll under, and it takes quite a while to adjust new players to roll over. It is just a habit you make. Yeah, exactly. Sometimes, let's be honest, sometimes people complain about a gaming feature having not played with it and not making it a subconscious, natural act. Because I've heard people complain about we shouldn't have to roll initiative every round. That's too complicated. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, but you roll all the other dice for all other things every other round. Like, why would that impede? And it's just because of a habit that people have not maintained. But much like using static damage versus random damage in fantasy gaming. and that kind of thing. Vince says gaining wounds and scars in Blades in the Dark, for example, you gain those and you carry them around with you, and that may be a feature you want to gain. So I'm not presenting one of these as good or bad. I'm just saying to think about this feature in your game. Would you prefer to have characters who have 10 bits of equipment and you start marking that equipment off of your character sheet, or they have 0 capabilities and they start adding them onto the character sheet as they progress in the game? Some people feel terrible with the attrition, the death spiral, as it's sometimes called, where you have lots of capabilities and you're marking them off versus slowly building your repertoire in real time in the game. Vince says it is a bit gimmicky and only works well in very focused games. I once saw a guy who wanted to make a subclass for D&D with a Jenga mechanic, and I had to explain to him why this is not a good idea. Yeah. The thing is, I like the Jenga tower concept, but it's very difficult to port over, right? You have to really embrace it. Okay, that's number one. I thought I'd bring it up just as a thought experiment. Do we want to have things progress up and down? Do we want to have a mix of those in our game that we designed? And to understand that there is more to game design than simply rolling dice, that there is a subconscious element to it, that we might want to embrace for our setting and our theme, and that kind of thing. We also The next one I'm calling semantics. And I may be incorrect in my semantics by using the word semantics, but follow me here, okay? Sometimes the words we use are important for game design, and the features we call them. I'm going to pick on fantasy Dungeons and Dragons because it is so popular. But Vince agrees with me. He says, "Yeah, the feeling is much different if you gain or lose something." I definitely agree with that, and I think sometimes some games um, haven't benefited from embracing the idea of the up down, the gain loss feature. And this may not be a gain or loss. This may just be numbers getting higher or lower, that kind of thing. So I'm going to pick with Dungeons and Dragons again. I understand they're easy target, but they are it is the most popular role playing game, or at least series of games, seemingly worldwide. So we're going to pick on them. And one big thing about the game is that there are names for things in the game that don't relate to what it really is. Armor class, hit points, alignment, the word level being used for multiple things. Level of spells is not the exact same thing as level for character. And those words, although they are classic to the game and difficult to get rid of and remove, because I'm sure many people would feel like they're not playing Dungeons and Dragons anymore if it didn't have armor class or hit points or alignment or levels, even though we're using the same words over and over again. Hey, shitlords. Yeah, Big Brain Thursday, yes. Semantics involves using the correct words for the proper affiliation or associations. If you ever take a look at or page through Blades in the Dark, which is such a great framework of a book, you'll notice that there are features in it where the words are properly chosen for their applications. And those words don't need to be specific in terms of a narrowing down a capability. It can be just as generalized as you wish. For example, in my design, and I took this from something else, in my design for Obsidian Star, I decided to use the words force, flex, and fulcrum to represent a method of performing an action that isn't necessarily physical, mental, or social or explorative, that it can be used to apply to any of those things. So force, the word force doesn't necessarily mean physical force, although it can. It can mean social force. I'm forcing this person to give me information, which could be threats, intimidation, that sort of thing. Uh, the word fulcrum I wanted to use in terms of science because this is a hard science fiction setting. Maybe using another word like lever could have been appropriate, although maybe that sounds a little bit more ancient. And so sometimes the words we pick are really emblematic of maybe our setting. Um, I remember having a field day writing in a book. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to step away because I gotta reach behind me and get a book. I gotta do it. Let's see if I can find it here. Merkborg. I think this is it. Yep, 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 yep. Oh, oh no, 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 no. I gotta find it. It's too much. Yep, I found it. Sorry. I know. I don't normally do this, but I went down this rabbit hole. Yes, I went down the dark hole of finding terminology and uh, and finding compound words. And I, not that I know how I'm going to use them, but um, but I wanted to think of early America, and I found a bunch of these words like henceforth, notwithstanding, wherewithal, therefore, however, wheretofore, nevertheless, albeit, withstand, insofar, whatsoever. And I was just like, what period of time did we use that terminology, and could I use that in a role playing game? But to be more specific, you know, does your system have wounds, or is it exhaustion? Is it fatigue? Is it stress? What does it represent? We know that hit points, they describe hit points as not being the thing, but yet we look at them as hit points. Armor class, people say, well, you roll the dice, you either miss or hit. Is that really what's going on? Is that really a descriptor of what armor class is? Because it has the word armor in it, but we use the terminology hitting and missing. Are you really being missed, or are you deflecting? Is the attack ineffective, but you're really getting hit? And so, yeah, that um Shice May Day Part 2, perfect day to think. Yeah, yeah. Um Oh, Vince says, yeah, you can see that in the new version of Vampire V5. Yeah, they have changed quite a bit. Not quite a bit. They've refined this game system, and says you used to gain blood points, but in V5 you lose hunger when you drink. Very different in style. In one version, blood is fuel, in the others, you avoid being hungry for an animal. And I bet they wanted to reinforce the idea that you're always under threat of being hungry, that hunger for blood. And so it's not that you're gaining something like blood points. What they wanted to do is layer the horror on top of it, so that you are losing the hunger that is always there, right? And I bet that's what they tried to do. Drew says, I have a stress meter for my system and I track that up. Thus, you gain stress when things go wrong and become aggrieved, aggravated, or unhinged at certain amounts. And I'm not, like I said, you could have a stress count down or stress count up, or with semantics, you could have you could rename it peace, and it could be a high number, and you are centered or peaceful or meditated, or I'm not sure what terminology you could have, but as you start to lose that number, you realize you're going further into a stress field. Yeah, so so just something to think about. When it comes to semantic words, also, uh, Shai says those words are not very archaic. I have to use them all the time in my boring work. As a rock star, okay. Vince says he started with only two stats, blades and dark, which is fun. If you ever take a look at lasers and feelings, and so many derivations of lasers and feelings, it's basically a two stat system, and and things fall into one category or the other. It's either lasers or feelings, and whenever you perform an action using like blades and dark, makes you wonder, like, okay, well, if I'm going to be sneaky, which one is it? Well, psychologically we go, well, if you're going to be sneaky, it falls under dark, not blades, right? I want to be physical and I'm going to threaten them. All right, there's going to be blades. But what about picking a lock? Is it blades or is it dark? And what about climbing a wall? How about setting up a trap or navigating the woods? Is it blades or is it dark? And you know, that conversation is emblematic of certain semantic words that we use. But again, even the setting that we have, we can use certain types of terminology to represent what we mean, but because then that allows us to immerse ourselves into it. For example, we would never use computer programming in an ancient non-computered uh, a society, right? We may use something like bureaucracy, or I'm trying to think of a word, different words for the same skill over different time periods. So, for example, we may have, um, we may use the word organization in current day. Bureaucracy, maybe in a more political game or going in the past. We may use something like, what is the individual? A seneschal? I know I'm butchering the word. An individual that is, or major domo, or a person that runs a medieval homestead. We may use that word. We may look in the past and go, well, you know what? This term shogun happens to be on my head. So like daimyo and samurai or something may be more emblematic of your Legend of the Five Rings game rather than using the word knight or squire or something like that. Even till today, um, are your players who act on behalf of a governing system, are they law enforcers or are they security? Are they bounty hunters? And so depending on the, I think it behooves us to take a look at our words that we use and either get close to or stay far away from other games that use the similar terminology. So, do we really want to use, hey, we're doing a hack of fantasy D20 of some sort? Heck, we're hacking fifth edition. It's in the Creative Commons, and we want to make something different. Do we really want to use armor class, or do we want to call it deflection or evasion or luck? You know, some people say hit points is actually closer to pushing your luck, that you're not being struck by arrows and burned by fire. You are luckily avoiding a death blow because there are no other negative effects that happen to you until you lose your last hit point, in which case you go down. So is that the one lucky hit and all the others you're avoiding damage? Or is it exhaustion and bruising? And so yeah, stat not getting hurt. And you know what? Something that we often don't do in role playing games, which I'm not sure why we don't do this. We don't need to do singular words. We can use phrases. We can say, shit out of luck, right? You're or what are other terms for luck and chance? It could be luck, chance, downfall, um, pushing your luck, or heroism, or any number of those terms may represent something other than hit points. Or we could do a separation, and we've seen this plenty of times where you have like bruising or fatigue as one stat, and then you might have a smaller one that's like, well, if the numbers go above a certain level or a certain percentage or what have you, or you roll, the person gets to roll a dice pool, and one of those dice goes after your wound level or your stamina or your endurance or your body stat or physicality stat. And so separating the two you may want to have in your game, or you may not want to have separate things at all. Maybe the physical, the mental, the social is all wrapped up in one statistic. Similar in regards to Blades in the Dark, using that as an example again. Blades in the Dark has a stress and trauma mechanic, and stress is a seat of the pants, razor's edge. Hey, this costs you stress. You just barely got out of the situation, but the game system also uses a complication mechanism. So yes, you escaped, you burn stress, but your things are also getting worse. You're being hunted. The law is after you. You're going down dead end alleys and things like that. Drew says, um, I just it moved on me. Okay, here we go. Um, Drew says, I use nevertheless all the time. Yes. I like hearing some people across the pond use the word whilst, because I very rarely have ever had the opportunity, except right now, to use the word whilst I do this live stream. Yeah, it's like using the word among and amongst. You know, us stateside use while, like doing something a while or while we are doing something rather than whilst. But I love it. Shai says those words are not very archaic. I have to use them all the time. Oh yeah, sorry. Drew says have not played V5, but I heard they did that from a friend to whom I told years ago that vampires should do it that way around. Like I heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend that changes RPG right now. Dun-dun-dun. I I don't know. I'm just so stupid. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Yep. Vince says, I kind of like how Blades does it. He uses verbs like skirmish or attune, etc., because they represent what you do as skills should. Also, as was uh, reminded to me, I want to say it was the N King or Shitlords. I would like to give proper credit, but I don't remember. Um, do we use passive terminology or active terminology in our semantics? So, do you use stealth or are you being stealthy? Um, are you dodging or do you use dodge or evasion? Sometimes we may want people to be on the edge of their seats in playing this very cinematic game, in which case I would prefer to use very active verbiage that you are running, fighting, I am being provocative, I am being intimidating, I am being doing something boldly, scary, dangerously. I am, like I was saying before, I'm fighting, I am dodging, I am evading, I am being aggressive. But passive wording or might keep away the very cinematic nature of what you're describing. So if you're running a cinematic game, maybe you don't want to use the words like tranquility, or you don't want to use words like, oh, you have a fight skill, you have a sword skill. No, maybe you want to call it sword fighting, and it sounds a little bit more active, more aggressive and forward moving. So that's just my definition of using semantics in role playing games, and in the sense of, in your game, maybe you don't want to use the word. I remember when Fate, sorry, segue. I remember when Fate came out, and it was a big deal because Fate really broke down what it is we're trying to do in role playing games. And Fate used the word aspects and tags. And many people were using the word aspects and tags to detail their world as well in their game. And I always felt the word tags was inappropriately used, not because it didn't mean what it said, but I felt like a better term could be used to represent each creator's vision of what they wanted. So in terms of using Fate to make a horror game, someone would say, well, the horror monsters have tags that make them seem more monstrous, like slimy or shadowy or poisonous or grappling, or razor sharp maul. And it's like, well, yeah, the word tag does mean what you say, but maybe not use the word tag. Maybe apply to it a term like, um, uh, I don't know, horrific feature. Maybe that's really what you mean in terms of this. Maybe horrific features are something in a horror game. Fearful visage, and this is what that creature has, or something. Um, I've seen, what's another game where I saw that. the verbiage could have made the game a little bit better and a little more immersive. Um, but it'll come to me. I know I lost it. Shai says I had a middle school teacher back in Albion at the Michigan who said "whilst" a lot. I thought it was weird. I have heard it's a Brooklyn thing, but she wasn't from Brooklyn. And we pick up stuff, and sometimes we like to act like we're a little bit better than we think we are. Yeah, Vince brings up some of the stats in Blades in the Dark. Matter of fact, since we always talk about it, let's see, Blades in Blades in the Dark. Let's see what let's just bring up. I'm going to bring up the game rules, and let's see if we can find characters, crew, the basic. All right, let's see if we can find. I'm sure there is character creation. Here we are, and let's see if we have a list of some of the stats, and then kind of like look at them, how it's looked at, and then mm, 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 mm. Come on, I know you have it in here. Is it under the basics? I'm looking at. I'm on their website. Um, let's see, under the crew, Forged in the Dark. That's weird. Because you would think there would be. Okay, here we go. All right, let's go to the kata, and then let me share this out. All right, boom, boom, Blades character sheet, and here we go. While I talk about our third thing, so this is a Blades character sheet. I'm sure I can get this zero in on this because what I really want to do is look at the come on stats. There we go. All right, so this is a Blades in the Dark character sheet, and I'm gonna increase the size of this even more. Boom, boom, boom. So these are stats that are in Blades in the Dark, and if you take a look at them, they are as specific as they need to be to get the job done, and as generalized to allow the conversation at the table that one specific skill or capability could be in the place of another one. So, and then you can see that they are um gathered together amongst one category. So we have our insight category, and with those we have hunt, study, survey, and tinker. Under the prowess category, we have finesse, prowl, skirmish, and wreck. And then we have the resolve category where we have attune, command, consort, and sway, or consort and sway. And um, let's go back to let's do physical. So in prowess, there's finesse, prowl, skirmish, and wreck. And if you notice amongst these physical prowess capabilities, wreck can mean anything. And in our minds, I'm sure all of us are thinking like, does wreck mean like knocking down a door? Or does it mean wrecking somebody like in a fist fight? Or would that be skirmish? Or if I'm using a rapier, isn't that a finesse, or using a dagger, or a stiletto knife or something? Like, isn't that more a finesse skill, or a garrote, wire around the throat? Maybe I'm going to prowl. Prowl sounds very sneaky, but if I want to pick a lock, am I using finesse? And that conversation is built into the game. Now, mind you, 95% of the time, I think we can all agree on one thing, but maybe, just maybe, there's a conversation where, hey, look, my prowl skill is a lot higher than my skirmish skill. Can I prowl and just be sneaky while we're having a discussion with the rival gang? And I'm going to go around the outside so that I can sneak behind someone while they're not paying attention, while they're, having this gang treaty over whose territory is what. And that's where you go, yeah, that actually sounds really good and such. So, oh, moved ahead too much with me. um, yeah, Vince is like hunt, study, survey, tinker, yeah, finesse, prowl, wreck. You can use different stats for the same action, but it might be harder. Absolutely. Yep. Thank you for getting there before I did. Yeah, thank you. All right. So, uh, talked about up and down, whether you want numbers or words to go up or down. Would you prefer players to acquire new things as they travel through your uncharted world, or do they gather all of their belongings with them and they have 15 items of gear that they get with them, and along the dangerous way they lose those things? Do they go up and down? Do their numbers go up and down? Do When you roll the dice, do you gather more dice making you more effective, or do you roll, is it a roll under system or a down under system? Yeah, Vince, yeah, I had the book next to me. I don't, but type, show everyone. uh so talked about semantics as well. Sometimes the words we use maybe we want them very generalized, like a word like skirmish or hunt. uh, are you hunting for a person who's escaping your attention? Are you hunting down information, um, and that kind of thing? Or do you want it very narrow? Do you want your words to be very narrow? Hey, look, this word is about literally bleeding, like your character is bleeding out. I want to have blood loss in my game. There's something else for broken bones, and I want a separate terminology for bruising and broken bones, from like blunt attacks versus sharp attacks or something like that. Uh, that kind of thing. Drew says, my stress meter is the only thing that goes up and down. I have nothing else in my system that has numbers which could go up and down. And now, mind you, the up and down doesn't necessarily need to be numbers. It can be a feature. Hey, as my character goes through your world, I've gained a third social interaction feature. Like maybe I'm not. Let's pull this in here. Here's the social skills for in Blades in the Dark. So maybe I didn't have in your game sway, but you know, a half hour into the game, I gained something to allow me to sway the opinions of those that I come across. Whereas attune, command, consort, I mean, are they similar? Yes. Could you make the argument one could really involve the other one? Yes. You could also make the argument, if you're using one of these, like attune, maybe you're not using the other things. And what does attune mean anyway? We know in fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons, attuning means attuning to a magic item. But in a social context, are you is this more like blending into a crowd, moving along and acting in a way that attunes you to the behaviors of everyone else? Meaning, like, are you dressed and act appropriately to a very high class dinner, um, or are you acting with your head down and dirty clothes in a downtrodden, filled with dregs neighborhood, flea bottom, and you are attuning to the behaviors of everyone there? Whereas command is telling people what to do, but consort, is that seduction? Is that like and I know we're both doing things underhandedly, but we're both consorting together. Hey, I'm here to make a deal. And you don't know me, I don't know you, but we can kind of get along. Or, is sway closer to it? Hey, I'm trying to sway their opinions to fall on my side. Like the city guard let me into the city state. If you let me through, I'm just jiggling my change purse just a little bit, you know maybe that's more of a consort than a sweat. Who knows? And that conversation, do you want to even have that conversation in your game? Or are you a person who's like, you know what? I really don't want people even arguing about this kind of thing. I want to specify this is a specific skill to not be. Yeah. Drew says, I have no skills, social or otherwise. Oh, sweet. I like that. Yeah, and then Vince says attune is the magic stat. You attune to the ghost field. For those who don't know, Blades in the Dark does take place in a pseudo magical realm surrounded by the dead and ghosts that when anyone dies, they uh, a bell tolls and that dead person turns into like a ghost or a wraith or something like that. Yeah, Drew says, but now that you mention it, one can aggregate memories and connections. I like that. I like that idea. Um, all right. So, excuse me. Lastly, we're going to talked about up and down, talked about semantics, and lastly, our rewards. And talking about rewards can come across a little bit like a Pavlov's dog reaction. I put that down in a doobly doo. So, for those who are not familiar, Pavlov's dog experiment was a individual had a dog and would ring a bell, and at this I'm being very generalized, and the idea was that we can sometimes our emotional state can be related to actions that happen around us, even when we don't see those actions because we see the evidence of those actions. Okay, Pavlov's dog. Bell rings, food goes in bowl, dog hears bell, and then goes to eat food. Every time the bell rings, food goes into the bowl. So now the dog starts to salivate and tail starts to wag because now, whenever the dog hears the bell, it identifies, ooh, treats, great, I get to eat. The bad part about the Pavlov's dog experiment is that now the person started to switch it up. Rings the bell, dog comes running, smacks the dog on the nose or the rump, and punishes the dog. So now the dog relearns when the bell rings, I'm going to get punished. Ring the bell, now the dog has fear in its eyes. The experiment goes back. Ring bell, there's food. Dog is like, hell no. I don't trust the food because I got punished before. That fear was pretty. So the why I say a Pavlov's dog reaction for rewards is, and let me get to, I'm getting there to tabletop role playing games, is that when the players perform an action, what reward within the game do they gain from performing that action? And sometimes it's been said a number of times in amongst the role playing sphere, and it doesn't apply universally, but it is reward the behavior you want to see in your tabletop role playing game. So if the game, some would say, if the game you want people to socially interact, that you don't want them to draw blades first in your fantasy game. You want them to interact. You want them to have a conversation first, to explore first. Then there should be a reward system for characters not engaging in violent combat first, but instead rewarding them for engaging in social actions. The argument against rewards for that behavior is you want to very quickly reward a system so you can get back to doing a thing that is not prescribed. So some people have a dislike of prescribed social interactions in games, meaning like instead of us talking at the table and having some fun, we just roll dice to figure out whether you convince the guard to let you through or not, rather than we talking in character or semi in character. Like I could say, my character, you know, casually walks up to the city guard, slightly jingling their change purse, and goes, you know, it's a great day today. My friends and I would love to see your city and all of its splendor, right? And knowing, we at the table, knowing that this character is being subtle about it, but not too subtle. And the city guard says, well, I would love you to see the city, but I'm afraid that you know, the city coffers are low, and we would love to have our city coffers full. We would. It's a shame that there aren't those who would love to donate to the city coffers. And then the character goes, "Oh, I have another change purse." Calls over a friend, shakes the change purse. They add a couple of more coins to it, right? And that no dice rolled, but we are actively engaging in that, which means there may be a game. Maybe you don't want rules for social interaction in your game, but you do want prescribed roles for combat. Since we don't just claim that we can just kill things, we roll dice because there's a randomization to it. But I could, you know, you can make the argument that if I, as a person, am horrible in social interactions, maybe I'm very, I'm an introvert. I stutter, feel like I have a terrible demeanor amongst friends and family and role playing, but my character's better than I am. Why can't I roll for it? In our space, Skinner boxes are more common than Pavlov's dog. Yeah, all right, Dune. Dune, put your hand in the box, or an animal would chew its own hand off to snatch it out of there. Are you an animal? Or are you a human? Are you human? Yeah, Pavlov is about a signal before you do something. Skinner is about rewarding repeated behavior. And well, I you could also claim that, like, for example, um, I'm going to be very sarcastic here. Players kill monsters in fantasy game. Players get reward for killing said monsters. Therefore, when we see monster, drool, 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 here comes our reward, right? And but I do understand, like, the idea is that there is a repeated behavior and you want to see that repeated behavior. Now, sometimes we take the repeated behavior a little too far. Experience points were never meant to be designed to kill monsters. It just so happens that the thing that details the greatest amount of detail about experience points is always listed under monsters. Therefore, everyone assumed kill monster, get experience points, right? But that wasn't, I could find the quote where it says that that's actually not the case. But that's how we take it for today. So in your game, do you, if, if you want to have exploration be a thing in your game, what rewards are there for characters to explore? Because many times, yep, and like Shinobi says, in the old days, XP was gold. Experience points were gold. And on the surface, it sounds like, well, doesn't that make characters mercenary? Well, yes, but no, because that gold was spent on the character's background, meaning like fighters would build castles and forts and defensive measures. Clerics would build temples. So it wasn't really about, I want to be rich. It was, how do I fund a pseudo medieval enterprise, um, where I get followers and train them and have a safe location? Because the dark woods were always dark and dangerous. How do you defend the population? Well, you build a castle and you have, scouts and armies and things like that. So yeah, gold was experienced since it was about dungeon diving for treasure. And also, it wasn't about monster killing. So the greater you are, yeah, he's up early. So the greater uh, you are at gaining the gold without fighting, the greater chance you had of exploring that world. And encouraging exploring the world without getting into fights. As a matter of fact, it benefited you to talk to the ogre, because the ogre might help you out with the kobold problem to get further deeper into the dungeon, right? So, and that reward system, now a reward system doesn't need to be experience points. Reward system can be um meta currencies like fate points, moxie, hero points, luck points. um when you act in character, you get use of a thing. As a matter of fact, I'm going to pick with Vampire the Masquerade. Um, Vampire the Masquerade has a willpower trait, and that willpower trait is high and goes down low. We were talking about up and down, right? So that willpower trait might be 6, 7, 8 on your character sheet, and as you burn willpower, it lowers down, which means that you are losing your willpower to fight against the beast that is inside of you. But it also guarantees you successes. So it is a meta currency that you can spend, and the reward for acting in character. Vampire the Masquerade has a nature and demeanor system. So you pick a word that represents your nature, you pick another from a list that means your demeanor. And when you act within the confines of your nature or demeanor, you gain more willpower. There's nothing stating you must act. It's not like alignment. You don't have to act within those structures, but you gain something by acting within those structures. I not sure. Hmm. Probably that was probably a correction. In Numenera, you gain XP not for fighting, but for exploration. And since we talked about blades already, you have specific XP trigger for doing stuff your playbook is supposed to do. Yep, yep. Let me see if I can find it. As a matter of fact, it's here. Let me reduce the size down a bit. And this is the cutter. So items. Let's see if I can find it on the playbook. It should be. There it is. There. Okay. Let me increase the size of this, and then I will let you guys see it. Let me center it here. All right. So, um, this is a playbook for Blades in the Dark, and it is a character type known as the Cutter. They're violent. They are physically violent. So, under the playbooks here, we have experience for the things that they do. So every time you roll a desperate action, mark 1 XP in that action's attribute. And then at the end of each session, for each item below, mark 1 XP in your playbook, or 2 XP if that item occurred multiple times. And then, so here we have you address the challenge with violence or coercion, you expressed your beliefs, drives, heritage, or background, or you struggled with issues from your vice or traumas during the session. And uh, talking about how brilliant Blades in the Dark is, Blades in the Dark has so many functional features that you can pick from it and add to your game. These last two, you can add to any game, right? Oh, you gain experience when you express your beliefs, drives, heritage, or background. So sure, you can make a character with that has a dead background, meaning I'm just Fightor and I just arrived with a sword and shield and I'm just Fightor. But or I let's do hard science fiction. I'm astronaut out in space doing astronaut things. You know, you don't have a background or whatever. Well, if you never express it, you don't get experience points for that. So come up with something in your background. Maybe you mentioned an old photograph you have attached to the dashboard of the starship or something like that, or you talk about what's driving you as an astronaut. Hey, I did some bad things in my background, you know, or whatever, and I'm making amends for that. Which brings me to the second part. You struggled with issues from your vice or traumas during the session. Gambling obsession. Maybe you have some kind of paranoia. You're being hunted. Maybe you have a debt or something. Maybe there's a vice or a trauma that happened to you that made you become an astronaut in the first place. You know, I wanted to escape Earth because I did some terrible things to my family and friends, you know, and I feel really guilty about it. Maybe you were a soldier and you know the starship is taking you away from the battle torn realm of Mars and you no longer want to go back there, but now there's a mission to go back to Mars and you're being troubled by it or something, right? And none of this is mechanical. Like the only mechanical feature here is you gain experience points, but you don't have to have a numerical drawback to this. You could just say, you know, before entering the blast doors, I hesitate a little bit because I remember this from my past when my, you know, original Black Ops group was gunned down or something like that. And that just you know adds a little bit of more depth into the game. So that is an example. So what kind of rewards do you have for your game? How do you reward people in your game as well? Is it a combination of some form of leveling up or bonuses? There are games that actually reward you for failure. So, for example, in I believe one of the versions of Call of Cthulhu or one of the Cthulhuoid games, whenever you use a skill and you fail in that skill, you mark something next to it. And then at the end of the session, you get to roll dice to see if your skill goes up because failure often teaches us something. So it actually encourages you to use skills that you are not good at so that it embraces the idea of horror and failure, meaning characters slip and fall, they say the wrong things, they go down the wrong direction or whatever. It encourages failure in characters so that their skills get higher. And I believe in order to even get your skills higher, you must roll the dice below your skill level to in order to no, I think you have to roll dice above your skill level to get it to go up. So if you have a 30% stealth, it very easily will go up percentage wise than if your stealth is 70, which means you rarely roll above it to see if it goes up, things like that. So yeah, what is it? Random advancement or reward? Is it do you give out bennies? Cypher does that where it's like a GM intrusion. Drew says, I have thrown money and XP both out of my design. I don't do capitalism or ableism. I don't know if I go that. I don't know if I would go that far, but I've done both too. About like XP. Now, I don't see very many times people doing lateral experience growth. I know that sounds strange to have lateral experience growth, but follow me on this. Maybe you have a natural language game and a character is a street urchin, um, and that is on your character sheet. Maybe advancement isn't becoming a better street urchin. Maybe advancement is marking off the street urchin no longer, and you write on it noble. Find out that you have noble blood, and that like advancement could just be a change in the character's abilities rather than an improvement. So Tarzan and you know what was his real name? Or they had a movie where they gave him his real last name, Gray Stoke, something like that. So maybe your Tarzan character survival skill of 5 goes down to 3, but your etiquette skill goes up by 2 points because now you're in civilization and you're kind of losing your survival skill, your animalistic nature, because you're Tarzan and or no longer Tarzan or pretending not to be Tarzan any longer, and your etiquette skill goes back up because you used to be a noble, but you didn't have those skills before. But now your etiquette skill, which was just a 1, goes up to 3, and while you're back at home and that kind of thing. So maybe it's just like you don't gain or lose anything; you just move points. It's a 10-point system. 8 points was physical, 2 points was social. Now you're like, well, I'm gonna reduce my physical down to 6 and move up my social. So there's a possibility of lateral movement, right? Just shifting, losing one thing to gain something else, so you're always in equilibrium. That's also a reward system as well. The reward in my system is catharsis that you get from a character arc. I like that too. Now I'm that kind of person that I don't need. This is the 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 Skinner box Pavlov dogs argument against this whole thing is that some people say, well, maybe you should be role playing with people who don't need that outside stimuli to get them to act in a way that's appropriate to the game. But you can't predict that with everyone. So, it's like, hey, my game doesn't I'm picking with you, Drew. My game doesn't have a reward system. People are just expected to play the game in the way that I have prescribed. But, we have a history of people not doing that and trying to min max their way to play the game in the most optimal way to gain the best benefits. And if in Dungeons and Dragons, commonly, what is it now? It's intelligence. It used to be charisma. Now it's intelligence, where you have a dump stat, and the reason there are dump stats is because if there's no use for it in the game, some people say why use it or even have it in the game, right? So um, it used to be that perception was never even an ability in the game. In order to perceive something, you had to act in a manner to perceive your environment. I'm going over to the tapestry and moving it with my 10-foot pole. I'm walking down the hallway and sending a chicken ahead of me or rolling marbles or something. I'm going to the door and listening at the keyhole in the door to see if there's anything on the other side, right? That was a real thing that players did in the OSR. Once perception became a maximizer, there are many characters who maximize their perception to go into a room and go, what do I perceive in the room? Rather than I walk into the room and have to engage with the thing in the room. And in the OSR, there was no perception ability. Well, that's not exactly correct, because you did have a D6 ability to like sense secret or concealed doors for like elves, and dwarves could sense like variation in stonework, but that was about it. Vin says Dungeon World also lets you mark XP when you roll a 6 or less, failure, but it's not always a good idea to do so because, like, like this, your players want to roll all the time for everything. If you want a player to do something, make a rule for it. Yeah, that's true. Uh, Although the dark side of making a rule for it is accounting for all of the side exceptions to the rule, such as many role playing games have awkward rules for being incapacitated and having a life threatening and being in a life threatening situation. So your character is tied up, they're grappled, they're incapacitated. Someone goes up to your character and holds a knife to their throat and threatens that character. Is it insta death? You know, and sometimes the rules for that are awkward, right? Drew says Trollblade uses such a system in which you can slide the scale between two aspects. Yeah, I think Fate does something similar where you get to rename your aspects of your character. So, like, an aspect of my character could be street urchin, and then an advancement, air quotes advancement, is I just erase street urchin and now I write down noble, or rich merchant or experienced traveler instead of street urchin or something like that. So Fate does a similar, like, there's no numerical growth exactly. It's just shifting of the territory. Shinobi says Mythic Bastion Land and Knave kind of has systems like that where you start as low rank in society and end up higher. In Knave, you start as a wretch level 1 and end up as a knave level 10. Yeah, and sometimes that even gaining when I okay, not gaining levels, gaining social status can be a reward itself, where you have like fa- famous and infamy. um, Runehammer's Crown and Skull game uses a similar thing. At a certain level, you either become Crown or Skull. Crown meaning you become more noble and wanted to defend the land, or you choose the Skull, and if you choose Skull, you become more wretched and evil and despotic as a leader in this world. Crown and Skull, check that out. Oh, to pick with Crown and Skull, Runehammer has a countdown loss system for hit points, which I love, where you write down equipment on your character, and when you suffer damage, instead of losing numbers, you actually start marking off your equipment. So if you suffer 3 points of damage, you might have to say, okay, I lose my rope, my torches, and oh, I really love that 10-foot pole, and you lost that. And you explain within the narrative, you explain why. Like, maybe you are Fightor and you had your backpack with the stuff in it, and you're like, this backpack is you didn't suffer damage. The backpack was annoying to you, so you dropped it on the ground to continue fighting with your two-handed sword, right? And that can be a narrative feature. Why did you lose this equipment on your character? And eventually you might lose your shield, your helmet, your cloak, your breastplate, and these represent like the downfall of your character in battle and as a physical thing, or even in exploration, where I jump across the cliff. Oh, great. You roll the dice. Oh, you suffer a loss of 2. Okay, I'm going to mark off my tinder box and my food rations because they fell out of my backpack because I hung by my fingertips when I tried to jump across the cliff. Something like that. Shai says plenty of old school games did indeed have perception as a core stat. Yep. And maybe in our game design we got to beware of having like certain things as a core stat because they might be overbalanced. In fantasy Dungeons and Dragons, dexterity is a power stat, whereas intelligence isn't. And so when designing our games and with rewards and things, we want to be careful of like, okay, is armor so important that every character wants to wear it, even though my game is high fantasy and I imagine people being swashbucklers and not wearing any armor? So you might want to figure out like, do you want to reward people? If you want to reward that behavior, let's say swashbuckling and not wearing armor, what benefits do they have versus the I'm going to wear as much armor as possible, even though maybe there are no drowning rules in your seafaring game. In which case, the player character is like, I don't care if I fall in the water, I'm not going to drown. So there's nothing limiting my mobility because the armor rules don't limit my mobility. So why wouldn't I wear as much armor as possible in a swashbuckling style thematic game, right? So that's that kind of thing. Vince says in Dark Eye, your social standing is a stat like others, and it informs how others from different ranks react to you, which I love. Sometimes being low rank is better than being high rank. Getting robbed is no fun, and getting access to a thing. And again, this may be a you may have a fluctuating stat that neither goes up and down, but and I should have brought this up, vacillates between two ends of a spectrum. So you may love to sit in the middle, but society doesn't like you sitting in the middle. They want you to make a decision. Which side are you going towards the crown or are you going towards skull? Are you a noble, upright citizen of high stature, or are you lower status but the criminal element or the unworthy or untouchables um, value your presence. They respect your presence, and so you could have stats that move from one to another, from one like purity to corruption may be a stat in your game, and it goes from 1 to 10. So 1 to 5 is purity, 6 to 10 might be corruption, and maybe it moves from one to the other. The further you move into corruption, you have more. Maybe you can create darkness and fire and read minds, but maybe in purity, you are immune to those things. You can see in darkness. You're immune to fire. Your mind can't be read. And that purity corruption stat may vacillate between the two as a reward style system in your game. That kind of thing. Drew says perception had been once the first skill I kicked out, but since I like fist because it makes sense. I know it was an accident, but I like it. Yeah, first skill I kicked out, but since all the other skills followed as well as attributes, and that may be a thing. Drew, please tell me in the chat I called it empty spaces, but there's an actual terminology for having empty spaces in your game, and that is the purposeful reason for not creating a rule for a thing so that conversation can happen to describe the very thing you have not made a rule for. So an example is in the OSR, by not having a specific perception skill, it required players fruitful void. Thank you so much, and thank you very much for understanding what I mean by me talking out the side of my neck. Fruitful void. You may not want to have rules, and this not having a rule is a rule. And what I mean by that is you may want to have cross table talk for your players and game master or maybe there's a GM list game to discuss the ramifications of an action where there are no rules involved in that particular action. So you may also want to have a fruitful void if creating rules for it is so complicated, it's actually better never to actually assign a rule to it rather than try to describe a rule for that thing. So an example for a fruitful void is in the OSR, very few characters had a very generalized perception skill because it encouraged, don't roll the skill to see what you see. Tell me what you're doing, and then we will find out what you find. I use my 10-foot pole to move the tapestry aside. Great. You find a door behind the tapestry. There's a bed in the middle of the floor. Great. I'm going to move the bed and see if there's a trap door underneath. Great. You found the trap door. Character, it's not I walk into the door, I roll perception, what do I see? I don't know. Okay, you see a room. There's a bed, there's a tapestry on the wall, there is a cabinet or something, a wardrobe against another wall. Okay, I open up the door of the wardrobe. Are you checking it out? No, I just open up the door. Great. Okay, your hand is stung with a poison needle. Oh, why? Well, because you didn't tell me you were being careful. You were carefully opening it to see if there was a trap. You just said, I'm just going to go over. And that's where I'm both mixing forward progress without rolling dice, but also the downfall of that is you can have with the fruitful void could have someone can say, well, my character is a 5th level fighter, and wouldn't they always be careful? And someone else may say, well, we don't have a rule for that, Would you have seen a poison needle? No, the thief or rogue in the group, remember back in the day, they were called a thief, not a rogue. Maybe the rogue would have noticed that poison needle without a skill roll, without any dice. It's just a natural part of that character's profession and professional ability that you as a game master go, you know what? Everybody else is going to get stung by that needle except for the person who's skilled at those, who expects to see that kind of thing, you know. um so yes, you can design fruitful voids into your game by not actually addressing the very thing that happens. Vince says in Pendragon you have stats that come in sliders from one to another, like energetic or lazy, forgiving and vengeful, prudent and reckless, etc. I have never played Pendragon. I've heard it's a really great game. Pendragon is very interesting mechanics wise. They also have passions as attributes, and they can be very powerful in play. Um, Dune, Dune does that as well. Dune RPG. Let's see if I can find an image of a Dune character sheet. Difficult. Ooh, let's see if it'll. Imperium. Yes, I think I. I think I can share. Okay, share this tab. Last before we get out of here. The Dune character sheet, and this is just an example. The Dune character sheet has skills on it. Let's see if you can. I don't know if you guys can see this. They have. I have to move. Sorry. Okay, so the Dune character sheet, great, you guys can see it. Has skills like battle, communicate, discipline, move, understand, and that's cool, right? This is a version of the Dune character, a version of the RPG. But above that, you have a thing known as a drive, and so when you roll the dice, you add the number of your drive plus the skill to see if you're successful in what you do. So it's not even just what you can do, it's why you are doing a thing. And a lot of indie games have stats that aren't just what you can do. Like I can shoot a gun, I can run, I can lift things, I can fight, I can convince people, I have knowledge about computers, I have knowledge about survival. It's not just that. Sometimes many indie games want to know why or how you're doing something. So in this character sheet, this is from the website of Modifius, you have duty, faith, justice, power, and truth. So when you convince the guard to let you into the secret chamber, what is driving you to do that? Is it through faith? Is it through justice or power? Or do you want the truth to be exposed? And so it sounds strange, but the greater your drive is to do a thing, the greater your skill is. But that drive also lets other people know what's driving you to do that thing. So you talk to the guard and you say, hey, I need to convince the guard to move aside so I can get in to get those files. And you want this truth exposed because you're using your truth, which is your higher stat. The guard may go, look, I'm not supposed to let the truth out. As a matter of fact, if the truth gets out, my house goes down. So F you, dude, right? Like, but all the other thing, the guard may say, yeah, I agree with you. The truth does need to get out. And guess what? Maybe the guard gets assassinated. And everyone's like, someone got into that file. And the guard knows to let the truth out. Who else would benefit from the truth getting out? Player character, right? So that's just an example of like using different stats and things like that, and rewarding players for acting within their character. Shoot a gun? I can shoot gum. Yeah. Shinobi says, I learned about the fruitful void recently and plan on trying to use it in a Plan 5e dungeon crawl this weekend. Yeah, it's weird and difficult to embrace the fruitful void because we're brilliant people. Sometimes we want to embrace that. And like, shouldn't there be a rule for drowning and choking and getting choked and being in a vacuum and also breathing in poison gases? But also, like, maybe there's a reason why there isn't a real airless choking thing because it's too complicated to take up every single different version of that thing. Who knows? So sorry, guys. I, my computer draws so much dust sometimes that it's like, it's making me itch. Guys, have a great one. Thank you very much for letting me talk about game design. So, in summary, do you want things to go up or down in your game to embrace the themes of your game world? Secondly, semantics. What kind of words are you using for your game? Do they apply to your setting or time period? Are there less specific or more specific terminology that really encompasses what you're trying to say? Um, are wounds better than bleeding? Is hit points better than stress or luck or pushing your luck or something like? Are there different words or phrases that actually represent the thing that you are trying to describe? And will this make it more complicated or less complicated? Will it make it easier to understand or less easier to understand? Which I bump up against all the time. And lastly, reward systems. What kind of behavior do you expect to see in your game? What rewards that behavior or actually works against that behavior? And is it over encouraging a behavior you don't want to see? Does it cause min-maxing? Does it cause do you think your feature, your political intrigue feature in your game rewards players so much that they never ever want to put themselves in danger? They only want to talk to people across rooftops and behind stone walls and things like that because they never want to put themselves in danger. What is that? And actually with a reward system, what kind of downfall mechanism is there? In Blades in the Dark, they have stress. When your stress track goes down to a certain point, you start getting trauma, and trauma could be psychological, it can be social, it can be physical, and at a certain point, you because of committing crimes, you gain heat. And unlike losing your hit points and dying, basically, if you gain too much heat, you get arrested. And that is the downside to losing your numerical values. You get arrested. And there's even stories about getting arrested and surviving your time in jail in Blades in the Dark. It's actually more intricate than we give it credit for. But maybe there's something in your game, instead of like, oh, you lose your hit points and die, maybe you become a spirit or you become kidnapped and captured. Maybe you lose the will to fight or you become corrupted or something like that. So maybe there's another downslide issue in your game or uptick in your game. Hey, if you go above a 10 in your corruption scale, you become an agent of darkness and you have to get your corruption to come back down again. And you go, oh no, that means it's going to count against all the very good things we did for my character. That kind of stuff. So guys, thank you very much for being part of the show. Yeah, bring some heat on the jabroni. Yeah, guys, yes. So thank you very much, guys, for being part of the show. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for letting me be a little bit high-minded. I didn't talk specifically about Obsidian Star, but I thought I would talk about the thoughts I have when doing game design and things like that. So because basically I'm going to use Trophy. I really want to use Lumen. I'm probably also going to use Cairn, not Karen. CAIRN. I think I spelled it right. And those systems, and kind of modify those systems to kind of bring about this hard science fiction, and so that there's a wide expanse of people who could take part in this hard sci-fi setting and then experience it the way they want to. Maybe they want to be heavily armored, power armored individuals fighting on the surface of Mars and its general orbit. Maybe they want to be, maybe you want to play characters that are freebooters that are trying to gain resources, and it's very dangerous out there. You don't want to shoot guns, but you do want to collect resources, and you're fighting against other people who are ice haulers and gas giant miners and that kind of thing. So just coming up with different ideas. So guys, thank you very much for being part of the show. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for participating. Yeah. Happy Vice Friday. Yeah. And a good old Thursday. Guys, have a great one. I'll see you later. Peace and tranquility.